Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel SF with AK. This is Aman Kumar, a 22 times certified Salesforce architect. This is part 4 of our Summer 26 update series. If this is your first one, the earlier videos are linked in the description. Today is going to be a slightly different vibe here. Parts 1 to 3 had something for everyone: admins, builders, developers. But part 4 is purely for developers. All 8 features are from Apex. And honestly, this is the most consequential video of the series so far. Because if you upgrade an Apex class API version without testing first, your SOQL queries, your DMLs might start throwing exceptions. And that is not a bug, that is the headline change of this release. So let's get into it. Okay, quick agenda for today. We are going to discuss 8 features. The first one is default user mode in API version 67. Then default with sharing on the class level. Then with security enforced keyword is being retired. Then the triggers will always run in system mode now. And this one is also applicable to older API versions. Then we will discuss how we can enable the elastic async limits or increase the async limits. Then there's a new feature called multiline strings. Then there's a new metadata file, InvocableActionExtension. And at the end, we will discuss a constructor visibility rule for invocable parameter classes that's easy to miss but breaks the deployment if you forget it. Before we dive in, quick recap of parts 1, 2, and 3 for anyone who is just joining. Here's the story so far. We have discussed 20 features across 3 videos. Part 1 covered 6 features. Web console, the new IDE inside your org itself. No VS Code needed now. Then there is an update on data table lookups, which allows us to see the record names instead of IDs. Then there is a new radio button group component in ScreenFlow. Now we can collapse the fold paths on the flow canvas. Then we discussed how we can set a batch size for scheduled triggered flow. And at the end of the first part, we talked about a new tab called Field Access in Object Manager. Part 2 was all about flows. We discussed 7 features. We now have new date operators in decisions. Then we talked about how we can use formula mode and transform mode for action inputs. Then we talked about the removal of optional parameter toggle that we had in flows has been now removed. Now we have more components that support the styling options. Then we talked about how we can upload static resource image directly inside the ScreenFlow without going to setup. And at the end of the part 2, we talked about how new send email action stores the email template name instead of ID. In part 3, we covered 7 features. The first one was we can now have LWC inside a dashboard itself. The row level formula limit increased from 1 to 2 in reports. Then there was CSV export injection fix. Then we talked about a new checkbox on queue level and sharing setting level that allows us to not save the records based on role hierarchy of queue. Instead, it will be only visible to the queue, and anyone higher in the role will not have access to those records. Then we talked about a new permission which allows the users to edit the shared list views. Then there are 2 features which went GA, single component preview and LWC state management. These 8 features makes the total count to 28. All the 3 earlier videos are linked in the description. Let's get into part 4 now. Okay, from API version 67, plain SOQL queries and DML statements inside any class will by itself run in user mode and not the system mode. What it means that it will respect all the permissions of the user. 2 things will get enforced when the user mode activates itself. The CRUD permission of the user. Can the running user read the object, edit the object, and delete the object? And then field level security. Can they see these specific fields which are being used? Up until now, Apex always ran in system mode by default, unless you specifically mentioned the keywords like with user mode or with security enforced. It was always in system mode. The problem with that is it depends on the developer to write those keywords. In large orgs where multiple developers are working, you can't just rely on that. So Summer 26 flips the default from version 67. User mode is on by default. All the CRUD permissions, FLS permissions will automatically enforced. No keyword is needed now. 2 things to keep in mind: your existing code will not change. So any class that you have in version 66 or earlier will not change anything. That will still run in system mode. The new default will only kick in when you upgrade the API version of a class or create new class in API version 67. Second, once you update the class, I would recommend you test that before you ship it to production. A query that return data in version 66 might throw an FLS exception. And that is not a regression. That's the whole point of changing this. So let me show you how it works in Salesforce. Let's go back to the org. Okay, I'm in developer console. I have a class account service which implements four methods. Get records, which is simply doing an SOQL. There's no keyword with user mode or with system mode. Similarly, I have a database method which does not implement any keyword. I have two methods, get record as a system, which implements the keyword with system mode. And similarly, I have a database method which implement the same system mode here. Now let's run these methods and see what happens in version 66. For the demo, I've created this test class. In this, I'm using see all data equals true, which is not recommended. So I would suggest you do not use that in live scenarios. This is just for the demo. So I'm querying a user here who does not have the admin permissions and running the class based on that user. Now let's run the class. Let's open the log. Click on debug only. And as you can see, all the four methods return the same record, one record every time. Now let's just change the API version of the class without changing anything on the query. So I've changed the class. Let's save it. And let's run the same test class again without changing anything on the test class. Let's open the logs and go to debug only. Now we can see in system mode, it returned the same record, but in user mode, where we did not write any keyword, it threw an exception. No such column active on the entity account because the current user, the user that we queried, does not have access to the active field on the account object. That is why we are not able to see that field. So without changing anything on the query, we just upgraded the class to API version 67 and it by default implemented with user mode. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, the next update is similar to the first one. Up until version 66, an Apex class with no sharing declaration defaulted to without sharing. Everyone knows that it was not safe and you need to declare the with sharing keyword wherever it needed. From version 67, that flips automatically. No declaration means with sharing, and that will implement all the sharing settings of that user. So if you have got a version 67 class that forgets to say anything about sharing, records the running user can't see won't be returned. The platform will respect the user's sharing context by default. You don't have to think about it. You don't need to write any keyword. If you generally need to bypass sharing, let's say for a system job, you now need to declare that without sharing keyword explicitly. If you don't write the without sharing, it will be with sharing. So that means no more accidental privilege escalations just because someone forget to type in the with sharing keyword. For inherited sharing, the behavior is same. There is no change there. The upgrade rule are same as first feature. When you upgrade the class to version 67, you need to test that out in sandbox first and only then you deploy it to production. Let's see that live in Salesforce. Okay, I'm in Salesforce. Let's log in with another user because I am the admin. I will be able to see all the records. So let's go to setup and I have another user, Amit Yadav. Let's open that. Let's log in with that. And I have a flow on that I've added to the account record page. Let's open that flow. So as you can see, this flow only shows one record because our class is in version 67. Now let's downgrade the class to version 66 and save it. We have not changed anything on the class level. Let's go back to the record page and refresh it. And as you can see, the user can now see 10 records instead of one. Just by switching the API version, I'm able to control the security. So in version 66, I don't have any keyword. That means it's without sharing. If I upgrade it to 67 and do not write any keyword, it will be with sharing. That is how the sharing will be controlled using API versions. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, next update is with security enforced keyword is retiring. So now we cannot use with security enforced in SOQL queries. Now we need to use with user mode. Let me show you how the error will be there and how to change that. Okay, I'm in developer console again. Let's use the with security enforced. Add it here. Because we are in version 66, we will be able to save it. But let's say you need to update the class to 67. You are not replacing this particular keyword. Now let's save. And as you can see, there's an error. With security enforced is no longer supported. We need to use with user mode instead. So we need to replace this security enforced with user mode. and it will allow us to save. There you go. With security enforced keyword has retired now from version 67. You cannot use that. Instead, we will be using with user mode or with system mode. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, the next update is triggers will always run in system mode now. And this behavior is not for version 67. It will implement to all the API versions. And to implement the user security settings, you either need to use with user mode or you need to add the business logic to a trigger handler, because in trigger, it will always be system mode. Okay, let's see the next update. Okay, elastic limits for async apex. This one is in beta and it's a quite game changer. So every Salesforce org has a daily limit on async apex executions, queuable jobs, future jobs, schedulable jobs. The limit is calculated per day from your license count. You hit the limit and additional jobs will throw limit exception and your jobs will stop mid-run. So Summer 26 ships a new toggle or checkbox in Apex settings that's called use elastic limits for async Apex. We need to turn it on and our org will have double the limits. So jobs that would otherwise have hit the limit and failed, they will get throttled. The process will be slower, but it will process. There will not be any failure. Let me show you where the checkbox is and how you can enable that. Let's get back to the Salesforce. Okay, we are in setup. We need to type in Apex settings here. In Apex setting, we have this checkbox. Use elastic limit for async Apex. And this is only applicable to queuable Apex and future methods. It clearly says that the jobs that exceed the limit will be throttled. Batch Apex and scheduled jobs remain capped at the standard limit. There's no change there. So this external limit is only for queuable and future. You can simply enable this by checking this checkbox and you're done. There will be less job failures now. The pace will be slower, but jobs will not fail. That's a plus. Okay, let's get back to the PPT. Okay, the next feature is multi-line strings and string templates. So if you ever built a JSON payload for any callout or an email body or a SOQL string in Apex, you must have felt the pain. If you need to write multiple lines of strings in separate lines, you need to add the plus sign and it was messy. And if you ever needed to add apostrophe inside the string, you need to escape it with a backslash. But Summer 26 gives us a triple quoted multi-line strings. 3 single quotes open it and 3 single quotes closes it. Everything in between these 3 single quotes is your string. You can add line breaks, you can have quotes, you can have special characters. All of it will just work. This also pairs with a dot template method on strings. You pass it a map of string and object and you reference your variables in the string with the $sign curly braces syntax. Now let me show you directly in Salesforce how is this working. Let's get back to Salesforce. I can open the classes here as well in developer console. I have multiple string here. And as you can see, this is our old method where we need to, if we need to declare a string in multiple lines, we need to start with a string, then plus sign, then again a string, then plus sign, then string, plus sign, and it was messy. If you are building a JSON payload that goes multiple levels, different structures, it was real mess. But now with the new 3 quotes, we just need to type in 3 quotes from start and end, and anything in between is a string. It can be line break, it can be different braces, it can be anything. It doesn't matter. As long as it's in between these 3 braces, it's good. The only check is that you need to start from next line of the 3 quotes. So if I start the string like this, it will not recognize this as a string. It will throw an error. Let's say I try to save it, and you can see there are multiple errors now. But as soon as I hit next line, the errors will go away. And also, when I run this, you will see how good the look is. Let me just try to show you. Multiple string. Here I have the method. Let's click on execute. And as you can see, the new method prints every line in a separate line. But the old one, where we had the multiple strings added by plus signs, are all in single line. To add a next line, you need to add \n and then it will go to next line. There is also a plus sign. And then there's a new method called template, which allows us to interpolate the string. We just need to pass a new map of string and object and any variable that you define with the curly braces and with the $sign, will be resolved at runtime. So when I ran this method, you can see it will be printed as my account and last updated at this particular time, which I passed over here in the map and not in the string. So that is a new method that we can use. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, this is the one if you build Apex action for flows, and which I am a big fan of. When you write an invocable method with invocable variables, the inputs shows up in flow builder as a property panel. So admin fill in values. The default UI is generic text or resource picker per input. It works, but it's plain. There's no customization there. And as of today, if you want to have a custom UI for your action inputs, you got one editor for the whole panel. It's either all or nothing. But Summer 26 ships a new metadata file called InvocableActionExtension. With it, we can do four things that were not possible before. First, we can attach LWC editor to a single specific input parameter and not the whole panel. We can mix custom and standard widgets in the same action. Two, we can define static pickless values for an input directly in the metadata. So the users or the admin doesn't have to write in the values, they can just pick and choose. Third, we can add a custom panel header LWC at the top of the property panel. We can drop in instruction, validation hints, context setting UI. So that is for admin. And four, streamlined metadata type binding for inputs that needs to reference other org metadata. Let me show you the structure and how it looks in Salesforce. Let's open a flow. Go to flows. Let's open the screen flow. Let's duplicate this tab or split view. And we'll open the same flow in two simple screens. So we can see the difference side by side. So this is a method that I'm calling with the extension file. And now let me add one without the extension. So you see the difference. Here I can divide these in sections, delivery and content, which is not possible here. Also, I can add pick list values here. As you can see, I have already provided values for urgency, high, medium, and low. You can just select that value and you're good to go. So that is how you use extension file. Let me show you the file, how it looks. For that, let me open the web console. And this is my invocable extension. In this one, we have targets. So for each parameter, I have a target. This is for channel parameter. This one is channel for this one. Now, I have attribute which decide the order of the parameter. Then I have an attribute for grouping of the parameter, if I need to group it. Then for the second parameter, which is urgency, I have already provided a pick list value list, which will be have the key provided value list. I can pass the list here, or I can use a dynamic Apex class, which will pass the values based on some input or anything. Then the third parameter has a different group called content, and the order is 3. So that's how you decide the order, you decide the grouping, you decide multiple pick list values or other customization that you need to do. That is how the extension file works. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, the last feature for today, constructor visibility for invocable parameter classes. So here's the scenario. You have an Apex class that bundles input for a flow action. A wrapper class with invocable variable fields. You pass it as the parameter type to your invocable method. Standard pattern, no change there. The wrapper class needs a visible no argument constructor. Why? Because the flow needs to instantiate your wrapper at runtime to populate it. If the only constructor on your class is parameterized, flow can't build it and your action will stop working. If your class has 0 explicit constructor, Apex provides one automatically with the same visibility as the class itself. So that is the simplest wrapper class. The one with just invocable variable fields and nothing else. It will be fine. Nothing changes for you. But if you added even a single parameterized constructor and forget to also add a no argument one, you will get an error. Second, the visibility rule. So the visibility should be public for non-package classes and should be global for managed package classes. If you're shipping a managed package and your wrapper is public instead of global, the action will fail at the customer's end, not your end, which is the worst kind of bug to debug because it will work for you, but when you ship it to the user, it will break there. This applies to version 66 and later. Version 65 and earlier, keep the old leniency. Let's see directly in Salesforce how to implement that. Okay, I'm in Web Console. Let's open Send Email Action. If I remove this is old behavior and it works fine. Until version 65, it will work as it is. Even if I have this parameterized input variable, it will work. The constructor receives two parameter and it does not cause any issue. But if I save this in version 66 and later, it will cause problems. And it will not throw errors here. If I save it, it will let me save. But let me go back to the Salesforce and open a flow. Let's say this flow. Let's close one window. We don't need that. Now let's call the demo and send email demo. And email, we can pass anything. It doesn't matter. This is just for demo. So it will not check anything. Let's save as a new version. And try to debug. And as you can see, it will throw an error. Type exception, send email action dot email input does not have a no argument constructor. So to resolve this, you need to add a different constructor here. So let's copy this, add here, and we need to have something like this. Now this will not throw any error. So at the runtime, the flow will instantiate this one, and then it will pass the parameters when we pass the parameters to the action. Now let's go back to the flow and see if it runs again and run. And there's no issue now. So that is the update. You need to pass a constructor only if you are passing a parameterized constructor. If you're not passing a parameterized constructor, then you don't need to write this one as well. And this will also apply to version 66 and 67 both. Before that, it works. Let's get back to the PPT. Okay, that is all for today. We have discussed 8 features now. Let's do a quick recap. Default user mode in version 67. SOQL and DML will enforce CRUD and FLS securities without a keyword. Similarly, default with sharing in version 67. So no declaration means with sharing. And if you want to override it, you need to write the without sharing keyword there. Then with security enforced is being retired now. You cannot use with security enforced in version 67 and higher. Then we discussed the triggers will always run in system mode now. And this applicable to all the API versions, not just 67. Then we discussed the elastic async limits for your viewable and future methods. Then we talked about multiline strings and template method. Then we saw a new metadata file, InvocableActionExtension, that allows us to add per input editor, inline picklist values, custom panel headers. Then we talked about constructor visibility. For invocable parameter classes, we need to have a no argument constructor. Well, that is part 4. We have talked about 28 features until now in 4 parts. I would generally love to know which Apex feature surprised you the most. Drop it in the comments. If you want a follow-up video on any specific feature, a deeper dive on invocable action extension, a hands-on with elastic async limit, anything that you want, comment that too. I'm always looking for ideas. If you found the video helpful, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.